Hi, I am Karl Urich. I am one of the founders of the website Albany Data Stories, where we analyze the city using public data. Back in June, I was a co-presenter at an event sponsored by the 901 Albany Democratic Club, where we analyzed the city's financial position and financial distress, looked at the origin story of that distress, and suggested some ways out. I decided to carve out a piece of my presentation, record it, and make it available online. This presentation really is a narrative of the city's crisis. I have no belief that it is the official narrative, as I've spent the last 9 months or so looking at the city of Albany's financial crisis through public documents. I have a point of view of the city's crisis, past, present, and potential future. But other people may have interesting points of view as well. And so I'm recording this really also to help promote debate about what are the root causes of the city's financial crisis and what can we, royal we, do to get us out of the crisis. So if you like what you hear, if you believe what you hear, please spread it. If you doubt what you're hearing from me or you doubt the conclusions, let's have a constructive debate around what the city of Albany's crisis is, how big is it, and what we can do. There are two things we'll cover in this discussion. One is, what is our crisis? What's the magnitude of it? What is the origin story of it? And then we'll talk a little bit about what can we do about it, or what are we going to do about it? Importantly, I get asked two questions. One is, who's to blame? And having spent the last 9 months looking at the city of Albany's crisis, I would say there's plenty of blame to spread around. People want to find one person or two people who are to blame. But I think we can credibly allocate or apportion some portion of blame to mayors, plural, auditor, treasurers, plural, former and current council, common council members, citizens of Albany, budget directors, and more. If we're looking to find like the person to blame, it won't happen. Blame to spread around. Really, where we should be looking at is what are some of the root causes for our current financial crisis? What were some of the decisions that were made with good intentions, but had unexpected, unintended consequences? And using that knowledge, how do we dig ourselves out of the hole? The second thing I get asked a lot is, how bad is our financial crisis? On the left side, are we Rose and Jack sitting on the bow of the Titanic? We've just received an $80 million new commitment from the state of New York, and all of our problems have gone away. Or are we a sinking ship about to approach bankruptcy? And the truth is, we're somewhere in the middle. There's no way we can claim that additional New York State funding helps to solve or completely mitigate our problems. But neither can we look at the city of Albany's financial position and say that we're an unsolvable sinking ship. So a piece of this narrative today is really to help you understand where we are between these two poles. It's important for us to also think about what our biggest financial problems are, revenue or expenditures. I spend a lot of time asking people what they think our biggest financial problems are. We can map our financial problems out using a very basic schematic. On the y-axis, we can look at the size in dollars of any particular financial problem that we have, and it's a relative scale. The x-axis there is about $1 million. Anything about $1 million and above starts to get into big money. And then on the x-axis, we can look at how easy it is to solve any particular problem. And everything is hard to some extent, so this is a relativistic scale, but are there things that are easier to solve that would be on the left-hand side, and the really intractable, challenging problems are on the right side? So we can start to lay some of our challenges, revenue or expenditure, on this grid. Landfill. Landfill gets a lot of press these days, although maybe a little less so. Our newer financial crisis has kind of put the landfill on the back burner. But this is a challenging problem, and it's fairly big. 8-figure big, $10 to $20 million problem. But the good news is we're not the only city that faces a landfill problem, and there are several paths we can take to get out of it. So medium difficulty to solve, and a decent size, but not horrendously big problem to solve in dollar terms. We can look at police overtime. Maybe we under budget by $2 million our police overtime. And that's significant. It's material. $2 million is roughly 1% of our budget. However, it's a relatively easy problem to solve. We know how to solve it. Either decrease overtime through one of many different means or hire more police officers. We can look at other things, school zone speed cameras and getting an accurate forecast on school zone speed cameras. We can play around with the forecasting. We budget $4 million. Maybe we forecast $3.5 million. Relatively easy problem for us to get our arms around. Decent size money, but again, less than 1% of our budget. Post-employment benefit obligations. The city owes hundreds of millions of dollars of liabilities for the post-employment obligations, heavily healthcare owed to our city retirees that number in the thousands. Yes, that's a big financial problem, but there's really nothing to solve there. The city has contractual obligations that can't be adjusted. It's an easy problem to solve in the sense that there really is no problem to solve. We have other things that get a lot of airtime, like the city has paid various lobbyists. And we want to understand the decision-making behind that. In the end, the dollar amount is very low, under $100,000 a year, which is somewhere around 0.02 or 0.03% of our budget. Small potatoes. So we can map all of these potential financial issues and take a look at them. But really what's interesting is what's in the upper right-hand corner. What are really the hard problems that the city has to solve that are high dollar amounts that don't get a lot of airtime, that people aren't really aware of? That's what we'll be discussing in this video. So let's start by just taking an outside-in view of the city's current financial position. And we'll use a tool created by the New York State Comptroller. Every year, the New York State Comptroller runs their fiscal stress test on every local government and public school district in the state. The rubric is pretty straightforward to evaluate local governments. There are 9 metrics that touch on financial reserves, use of short-term debt instruments, cash management, and more. You get points for bad behavior. Scores of 0 are absolutely possible. Those are the best financially positioned cities. Once you get above 50, a score of 50 or above, your city or local government is in some form of distress. The comptroller evaluates every local government on a yearly basis. Most recently, in September 2025, the comptroller evaluated the city of Albany using data from 2024. So we can look at the comptroller's scoring over time. We can go all the way back to 2014. 2015, the city was in tremendous distress with stress scores at 67 and 77. Those are levels that are considered significant stress. Over the late 2010s, through either intentional behaviors or just some nice convenient outcomes, the city's fiscal stress declined to a point where in 2019, we were off the stress radar. However, the pandemic started in 2020, and our reaction to the pandemic started to grow our stress into moderate stress, susceptible to stress levels, and then approaching significant stress in 2024. However, that's 2024 was the last evaluation at Albany Data Stories. We wanted to understand what is the stress level right now, and is it worse or better? So we gathered financial documents as of June 1st. We ran the rubric, the 9 metrics of the stress test for the city, and we came up with kind of a best case, worst case. Best case, the city measured right now on the stress test will have a financial stress score around 74, which is well into the significant stress level. It's also possible, worst case, that we'll have a stress level around 87. We have no reserves. We're starting to use short-term financial debt instruments, things that cause our stress score to increase dramatically. if we do end up with a stress score of 87, that would be about the worst score ever on the history of the fiscal stress test for local governments that we've ever seen. So the outside in view is the city of Albany has tremendous fiscal stress, and it's not going away, it is worsening. So in the next few minutes, we'll talk a little bit about liabilities, specifically the city's liabilities, and we want to kind of disambiguate and provide some clarity on the city's liabilities. We have three baskets of liabilities. The biggest one, about 2/3 of our liabilities, are pension and post-employment benefit obligations. These are the things that are owed to existing or future retirees. About 1/6 of our liabilities are long and short-term debt. This is the borrowing that we've done to pay for things, or the borrowing that we've done to, fill fiscal gaps, budget gaps. And about 1/6 of our liabilities are everything else. Money that we owe to the county or the state, judgments if the city has a claim held against us and we have to pay out a judgment over time. About 1/6 of our liabilities are kind of everything else. So when we think of liabilities, one of the best ways of thinking about the city's position is to reflect on our own household financial position. I'm sure most of you who are listening to this have at one point thought about your own personal financial position, and you kind of sit there and you list your assets. Maybe you own a car, maybe you own a house or a townhome. You have a bank account, maybe some other assets as well. And then you have liabilities. You have a Visa payment, a MasterCard payment, a school loan, a mortgage payment, car payment, etc. And that becomes our personal balance sheet, our assets minus our liabilities. And the city has a net financial position too. That's our assets minus our liabilities. It's a little bit bigger than our own personal balance sheets. The city has assets, our streets, our golf course, our buildings that we own, our fire trucks, our police cars, anything that we own. Cash as well, cash and cash equivalents, receivables. But then we also have liabilities, those three baskets of liabilities that I've mentioned. So our basic net financial position is we have $500 million of assets. Our liabilities are around $900 million as of 2024, and our net position is negative $400 million. That's very concerning. But in today's days and age, analyzing a lot of cities, probably 70, 80% of cities have a negative net financial position. However, net financial position is considered a little bit short in terms of revealing kind of the true position. The Government Accounting Standards Board recommends looking at net financial position for a better picture of your city. Net financial position looks exclusively at your financial assets. So we take off the table the streets, the golf course, the buildings, the fire trucks. We can't really sell those things. The city wouldn't sell our streets. So if we can't sell something, if it can't be monetized, can we truly think of it as an asset? So when the Government Accounting Standards Board says look at net financial position, they say just look at your cash and cash equivalent assets. For the city of Albany, that's $126 million. We still have the same liabilities, and our net financial position is nearly negative $800 million, nearly $1 billion. So that's very concerning. However, we have an additional iceberg out there. And to talk about that iceberg, let's again reflect on our own personal financial position. We all might buy a roof or a car. And if you think of those things that we buy, they have lifespans. When I buy a car for $30,000, I expect that car to last about 10 years. I expect that value of the car to decrease over time. Probably after year 5, my car will be worth about $15,000. However, the value of my car over time will depend. It will depend on the tender loving care I give my car. If I change the oil, if I clean up the coffee stain on the seat, if I do the proactive maintenance My car holds up a lot better. It retains its value. If I fail to do and perform the maintenance, my car loses its value over time. The city is no different. The city has assets, and we make decisions, royal we make decisions on how to maintain them and how much money to spend on maintaining them. So we can look at our assets, our capital assets objectively. We have about $716 million of value of our assets, kind of the total cost of our assets, our streets, our roads, etc., golf course, police cars, fire trucks, and more. But our assets also have a book value. This reflects the age of the infrastructure and our level of maintenance. We can also express that as a ratio. The book value of our assets is $283 million. The total cost is $716. The ratio of book to total cost is 40%. High-performing cities, as we analyze other cities around the United States, high-performing cities tend to be around 70 to 75%. Average cities around 60%. So the City of Albany's infrastructure is aging and not maintained to the level it should. And we really should think of this as a liability as well. What is that delta that gets us from 40% to 60%? How much would we have to spend to get our aging, crumbling infrastructure up to average? 20% of $716 million is $143 million. And we can think of that as catch-up maintenance. And we really should think about that as an additional liability. So if we have a negative $787 million net financial position, $143 million in catch-up maintenance on our capital assets, our true liabilities go well above $900 million, nearly $1 billion of true liabilities. As of the end of 2024, that number has undoubtedly gotten bigger. And equally concerning is our debt. Just a simple view of our debt over time from 2019 to 2026 shows this dramatic rise, this hockey stick of our debt increasing. We generally managed our debt decently through 2022, but between growing capital expenditure costs and increased borrowing to patch the holes that have come about due to our financial crisis, we see our debt increasing up to $180 million. What's at the root cause of this? Root cause is a lot of capital expenditure spending. If we go back to the 2019 budget, our capital improvement plan suggested $17 million of spending, $13 million of which would be financed with debt. In our 2025 budget, 6 years later, capital improvement program grew to 65, funded $44 million with debt. That's a 3x to 4x increase. We decided on a capital improvement plan that exceeded what we could afford, and we saw our debt grow dramatically because of that. Growing debt requires greater debt servicing. We have to pay the interest. We have to pay the principal. And when we look at our budget, a growing amount of our budget is spent on debt servicing. Now we're approaching 10% of our budget spent on debt service. So here's the bad news so far. External view, controller stress test, very concerning. We have large liabilities from heavily driven by pension and post-employment obligations. When we look at net negative financial position, it's very high or very low, negative 800 over negative 700 million. We have underfunded and aging capital asset management and a dramatically growing debt, which puts pressure on our budget every single year. And there's unfortunately more bad news. Historically, going back 5 or 6 years, a typical budget of ours, 33% of our budget was driven by property tax revenue. Currently, only 28% of our budget is driven by property tax revenue. So what happened? In the mid-2010s and beyond, our city and our budget directors, our budget strategy has emphasized low property tax growth. Year over year, we might have 0% growth. 0.5% growth, 0.8% growth in our property tax, very, very low growth. And we see our property tax increasing at a stately pace. And that worked pretty well in the 2010s. In the 2010s, late 2010s, our city managed our expenditures fairly well. But what happened is we hit the pandemic. The pandemic drove up in the rate of inflation. About 70% of the city of Albany's costs are people costs, which are heavily tied to inflation. Inflation goes up, our people costs go up. We see our budget increase, and our budget is increasing at a faster rate than our property tax growth. So two things are happening. One is our property tax rate growth is not very high, and we're not developing new residential and commercial properties. We're not adding to our overall property tax base. And so, this gap between the yellow and red line as of 2026 appears somewhat small, but this really is a 5% difference in how much of our revenue comes from property tax. 5% of our current budget of $230 million is around $11 million. You could say that we've underfunded our property tax revenue generation by charitably at least $10 million. And so what ripple effect does this have? We see revenue issues with all of our non-state aid and non-property tax revenue because we haven't been able to prop up our budget successfully with property tax revenue. We look at other tools for generating revenue. So we create new programs like school zone cameras to generate revenue, or we look at existing programs and hope through probably wishful thinking that we'll see dramatic revenue growth. We put together a chart that listed out every revenue line item that showed dramatic, probably preposterous or wishful thinking kind of growth. Safety inspection permits. In the 2026 budget, we expected those to grow by 36%, the revenue. Our landfill usage to increase by 46%. And these behaviors were not just in 2026, but 2025. So what happened in 2025? We had low property tax growth. We expected to make up that gap through this speculative revenue. The speculative revenue did not come to pass, and which was a primary driver behind our $19 million budget gap in 2025. So increasing people costs driven by inflation. We don't cut things in our budget. We have very little critical examination of what we're doing year over year. We've dramatically increased our capital expenditures, which helps drive our debt up. Low property tax growth through natural increases in the rate of property tax, as well as increasing our overall residential and commercial tax base. We've then relied on speculative revenue growth to fill the gaps, which did not come to pass. And we started to see that the bill came due in 2025 when our fiscal foundation just collapsed on us. We then had to use our reserves. Over the past few years, we've built up approximately $15 million of reserves, and all of those reserves have gone to close the gap in the budget, to patch the hole in the boat. We're a city with zero reserves right now. So you kind of look at this upper right hand, what's in the upper right hand corner? It's our debt, it's our capital assets, and our reserves. Three things that people don't really think about. Managing our debt, figuring out our best path to get a handle on our capital asset management, and building up our reserves are the three most important things that the city can be doing on a strategic basis. So, hey, there's a lot of bad news here, but here's the bad news, good news. The bad news is we're in a very concerning financial position. Good news is there are hundreds, if not thousands, of cities across the United States that are in the same financial position, about ready to fall off a cliff. And there are cities that have preceded us in terms of bad financial positions. And cities have recovered from worse or the scenario that we are currently facing on a financial basis. So let's talk about what are we going to do about it, or what could we do about it? The first thing is to take a very cold calculus look at how we think about capital asset spending and debt management. You know, politicians love to stand beside some sort of new capital asset that's been built or constructed and have a ribbon cutting. And we absolutely have to stop buying new infrastructure and capital assets. And we need to stop rationalizing it as well. Sometimes these expenditures get rationalized as, well, hey, the state is paying for a third of it or half of it. In the end, it goes on our books. We have to maintain it, and we have to pay all the costs associated with operating and maintaining it. And we do not get that for free. We also need to prioritize maintenance of our infrastructure as well. We have a 5-year capital spending plan that's built sort of using kind of the old way of thinking. That capital spending plan should be completely refactored to emphasize maintenance and kind of closing that capital asset gap of $140 million. And we should think in terms of the new New York State funding. Our desire might be to think about new programs that we can create. But right now, the most effective way that we can spend our money is to think about how New York State funding can pay for debt pay down, maintenance catch up, and likely also building up our financial reserves. Even if it's a symbolic $1, $2, $3, or $4 million, it would make a good first step towards building up a reserve towards a reserve goal. We also need to think about managing our revenue and expenditure levers. I tend to think we have 6 levers. We can rely on more New York State aid. We can cut our spending. We have received New York State aid. It's unlikely that we're going to be getting any more, but we should value the $80 million that we have. But that well is probably running dry in terms of new dollars. We can cut our spending. We have a $230 million budget that's grown 3% in the last year. There are certainly some opportunities for cutting spending, full well knowing that the spending that we cut impacts people, services that we deliver, and the city team members that are delivering those services. We can't take those decisions lightly, but there are spending cut decisions that we need to make. We could raise our non-aid, non-property tax revenue streams. Someone said, hey, we should have an Airbnb tax. Airbnb tax would be great if we were in Asheville, North Carolina with 5,000 Airbnbs. But at best, we have 100, 200 Airbnbs. Why are we spending our time looking at small revenue sources that really won't materially impact our financial position? We could use our reserves, but we have none now. Long term, we could grow our property tax base through more residential property development. Absolutely. We need more housing in the city of Albany, and we need housing that goes on the property tax rolls as quickly as possible. However, that's a medium to long-term strategy. What we do need to look at is raising property taxes. This will be incredibly unpopular. Totally get it. There are certainly some other options, like how do we look at shared services with Albany County or some other things that are certainly possible. But in the end, these are our levers, and we just need to decide which levers we pull and which ones we don't. We could put all our eggs in the basket of the New York State aid, not make any cuts, not raise any property taxes. We could take on tremendous risk associated with hoping for additional New York State aid and not make any hard decisions. That would be a bad approach. If we decide to not cut any spending on services that we deliver to the city of Albany, we're down to few options like raising property tax to cover the cost. So I get it. These are tough levers to figure out how to pull and in which combination, but these are what's available to us right now. Primarily cutting spending, raising property taxes, and medium term trying to grow our property tax base. We do need to see the financial crisis is almost certainly was foreseeable dating back to the third and fourth quarter of last year. Public awareness started in the March timeframe, and the city administration has been looking at a short-term plan to close the gap. But really now is the time to look at the long-term gap. What is the 4 to 5 year stabilization plan that the city needs to create that looks at four main pillars? How do we connect New York State funding to the city's hardest problems? Importantly, how do we spend our money on the hardest problems and avoid spending it on things that might feel good, but that don't get us to a better financial position? Number two, how do we look at revenue growth plan, especially concerning property tax? How to look at expenditure management? And how do we try to set some goals? Where should we be in 2030, 2031, and 2032? What are reasonable levels to get to in terms of our debt, our capital asset, and our reserve management? So I've walked through the City of Albany's financial crisis, some of the origin stories, some of the metrics, and some of the possible approaches we can take for solving our problem. A lot of my personal points of view have been influenced by the nonprofit organization Strong Towns. Strong Towns, a great organization that champions local government financial transparency and stability. And I like this quote from the founder of Strong Towns, Chuck Marohn, especially that first sentence in the second paragraph. Communities change when enough people start seeing things differently. I get it. It's tough to look at our city that we love, and see the challenges and the problems, and to realize that these challenges and problems are so dramatic and so big that they seem intractable. And we do need to think about different behaviors of how we spend money, how we raise money, and how we prioritize things, and how we deprioritize things. And this is all about change in perspective. There are a few resources that I would always recommend. Definitely looking at the Strong Towns website. There's a great book called You'll Pay for This by a guy, Michael Durand Wood, who runs a website for Winnipeg, Canada, Winnipeg, Manitoba. It's called Dear Winnipeg. And if you read it, you'll see a lot of the issues of Winnipeg resonate to anyone familiar with the issues of the city of Albany. There's also some great academic and industry research coming out. We like this article from Merit on infrastructure and capital asset commitments. It really validates a lot of our point of view that the city's capital asset management is really that iceberg that we're facing in the future. And if you like what you're hearing, if you don't maybe like the content, but at least you like the fact and data-driven point of view that I'm presenting today, please feel free to follow Albany Data Stories, our website. We're on Facebook as well. And also, if you have any questions or comments, please drop an email to albanyDataStories@gmail.com. And wherever we post this video online, please feel free to comment. I'd go back to what I said at the beginning. This is a narrative with a point of view informed by nearly a year of research, but it is not the definitive point of view. We're excited to hear what other people think about what the root causes are for our crisis and how do we get out of our crisis. So thank you very much. Really appreciate the time you took to watch this presentation.